Look around you. Statistics suggest that 1 in 5 people you know is a narcissist, not the mirror-gazing cliché you are picturing. Something colder. Someone operating on a completely different psychological playbook than everyone around them, and by the time you notice, the damage is already done. This is a survival guide for the modern world. We are unpacking exactly how to spot this personality style, the techniques to disarm it, and why the architecture of modern digital life has turned this behavior into an absolute epidemic. Stick around, because later I will explain why meeting someone incredibly charming, the kind of person who sweeps you off your feet, should actually be your biggest red flag to run in the opposite direction. I know that sounds completely counterintuitive to everything we are taught about romance and networking, but it is often the single most critical warning sign there is. Okay, let's slow the pace down for a second. Take a breath. Our mission today is simple: learning to protect your peace in an era of absolute entitlement. And to do that, we have to start by tearing down a massive, deeply ingrained myth about what narcissism actually is. When most people hear the word narcissist, the immediate assumption is that this is someone obsessed with themselves. You picture the mythological narcissist staring into the pool, enamored with his own reflection. But the psychological reality is the exact opposite. Narcissism is not a disorder of self-love. It is a disorder of intense, agonizing self-loathing. Let's unpack that, because the outward behavior screams arrogance. So how does arrogance stem from hating yourself? Think of the arrogance as a highly sophisticated defense mechanism. Deep down, the narcissistic individual is carrying around a massive weight of inadequacy, shame, and ugly insecurity. They are terrified that they are fundamentally flawed. But instead of dealing with that toxic shame, they project a grandiose false self outward. At their core, they are deeply miserable people, hiding it completely. The grandiosity is just a shield to prevent the world, and honestly themselves, from seeing the hollow core. So essentially, a narcissist is like a balloon. They present a huge, colourful, inflated version of themselves to the world, but inside it is completely empty. And if you prick them with even a tiny bit of criticism, they explode with rage because you are threatening to expose the emptiness. That inflated exterior is incredibly thin. Any perceived flaw being pointed out instantly activates their repressed shame, and that shame instantly transmutes into rage. It is crucial to distinguish this from psychopathy, because they often get lumped together in pop culture. Both can be highly manipulative and destructive to the people around them. So where is the actual dividing line? The dividing line is the autonomic nervous system. Psychopaths have a fundamentally different physiological makeup. Their resting heart rate is literally lower. They do not feel anxiety the way a neurotypical person does. If a psychopath does something dangerous or gets caught in a massive lie, their heart rate does not spike. They do not panic. They do not sweat. They are cold, stress-resistant, and entirely motivated by power or profit. Picture a shark moving through the water without a second thought. The narcissist is very different. The narcissist is constantly dysregulated. They are deeply anxious. Imagine walking around every single day with a metaphorical stomachache of tension. They are hypervigilant, terrified that their mask is going to slip and the world will finally see their inadequacy. That chronic anxiety is exactly why they are so hypersensitive to every comment, every look, every perceived slight, which raises an interesting question. If they are walking around with this crippling underlying anxiety, how are so many of them incredibly successful in corporate environments or public life? Shouldn't that anxiety paralyze them? It does not paralyze them, because they outsource the management of their self-esteem to other people. They require constant external validation, what psychologists call narcissistic supply, to keep the anxiety at bay. Getting promoted, being feared, or being adored acts like a temporary painkiller for that internal stomachache, which explains why this behavior feels like it is everywhere right now. There is a very specific catalyst for why this personality style has exploded, and it points directly to the year 2008, the launch of the App Store, and the explosion of social media. Before the digital age, acquiring narcissistic supply required significant effort. You had to actually do something. If a narcissist needed validation to soothe their anxiety, they had to leave the house. Perhaps they had to go to the office and dominate a boardroom, or excel visibly at a sport, or be the undeniable life of a dinner party. It required physical presence and actual social maneuvering. Now you can sit on your couch in sweatpants and get an endless intravenous drip of validation from hundreds of strangers. You do not have to actually be great. You just have to post a photo that looks great. The architecture of social media is the ultimate enabler for this pathology. It turned main character syndrome into a globally incentivized behavior. The platforms literally ask you to constantly curate a flawless, filtered mask for the world and then reward you with likes and comments. For a personality style that relies entirely on a false self to survive, social media did not just give them a megaphone, it gave them a globally accessible life support system. But here is the darker question. If they are so hollow, so constantly anxious and basically miserable inside, why do highly intelligent, successful, emotionally stable people keep falling for them? Why don't we spot this hollow balloon immediately? Because the trap is flawlessly designed to bypass your critical thinking. You do not see the hollow core at first. You see the mask, and that mask is intoxicating. They hook their victims using a calculated, predictable cycle of abuse. It starts with love bombing, a phase that completely overwhelms your nervous system. We hear love bombing thrown around a lot lately, often just to describe someone who is overly affectionate. But it is far more insidious than paying the bill and being romantic. Love bombing is a targeted sensory and emotional overload. It is intense, fast, and completely disproportionate to how long you have known them, moving in together after a month because, in their words, your souls recognized each other. It is grandiose gestures, but psychologically what they are actually doing is mirroring you. They study your desires, your vulnerabilities, and they shapeshift. They become the exact missing puzzle piece you have been looking for all your life. It is essentially a casino strategy. They flood you with so much dopamine and serotonin in those first few weeks that your brain gets hooked on the high. And if you are dazzled by the grand gestures and the constant texting, you are not going to notice the subtle red flags. They need you hooked quickly because maintaining that perfect mirroring mask is exhausting for them. It is fake. So once they know they have you, once you let your guard down, commit or move in together, the mask begins to slip. This is when you enter phase 2, devaluing. This phase always sounds disorienting. It is not a sudden, massive shift where they turn into a monster overnight. It is more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. The subtlety is what makes it so damaging. The devaluing starts with contemptuous digs disguised as jokes. I was just kidding as the excuse. It is dismissive interruptions when you are speaking about something important to you. It is suddenly comparing you negatively to an ex or a coworker. You go from being the most perfect being in the universe to feeling like you are constantly failing. How do you even know you are in the devaluing phase and not just going through a normal rough patch? A great barometer is the sheer mathematics of your energetic output. Healthy relationships naturally fluctuate, but they generally hover around a 50-50 effort level. In the devaluing phase of a narcissistic relationship, the math drastically shifts. You suddenly realize you are putting in 90% of the emotional labor, making all the sacrifices, constantly walking on eggshells to keep the peace, while they are putting in 10% and acting entitled to your 90%. You are exhausted trying to get back to the love bombing phase, not realizing that phase was an illusion to begin with. And once they drain your energy, they move to step 3, the discard. When you are no longer perfectly feeding their ego, or worse, when you start demanding accountability and holding up a mirror to their bad behavior, they withdraw entirely. They just drop you, toss you aside, often abruptly, or they utilize the silent treatment for weeks on end. Let's talk about the silent treatment, because neurologically, that is not just rude. It is actually a form of violence. Neuroimaging studies show that the pain of social rejection and ostracism, which is exactly what the silent treatment is, lights up the anterior cingulate cortex. That is the exact same part of the brain that processes physical pain. To your brain, being subjected to the silent treatment by an attachment figure feels like being physically struck. It is a highly effective way to punish and control you. There is a fascinating post-breakup test to determine if the person who just discarded you was a narcissist. It is all about material evidence. Think about your apartment after a breakup. It might take you hours, maybe days, to bag up all the thoughtful gifts, the concert tickets, the little reminders of the life you built together. But if you were to look at their apartment, there is absolutely zero trace of you. They kept no reminders. That lack of material evidence is chilling, but it makes perfect sense psychologically. They never really cared. The relationship was never actually about you as an autonomous human being. It was about them performing the role of the perfect partner and extracting validation. Once you stop providing that validation, you essentially cease to exist in their reality. But the cycle does not end with the discard, because eventually they come back. They always come back. This is the hoovering phase, named after the vacuum. They see you moving on, regaining your confidence, or perhaps they have just depleted their new source of supply. They hate losing a possession, so they return with love-bombing light. This is usually paired with future faking. They will promise you the exact future you were begging for during the devaluing phase. I signed up for therapy. I am ready to have kids now. I realize you are my soulmate, just telling you what you want to hear. They use the promise of a changed future to bypass your current boundaries. But the moment they have you trapped again, the goalposts move and the cycle of abuse restarts. Here is where it gets interesting, because you might be thinking, if someone treated me like that, I would just leave. But once a narcissist has you in this cycle, they deploy psychological warfare to ensure you cannot trust your own judgment enough to walk away. The primary weapon is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a term that has been heavily diluted in popular culture lately. People use it now to describe any situation where someone lies or just disagrees with them. But clinical gaslighting is a systematic grooming process. It is designed to dismantle your executive function. It is like they are hacking your brain. They corrupt your internal hard drive so completely that your memory becomes unreliable, forcing you to rely entirely on their operating system to know what is real. It is the relentless denial of your lived reality. They will look you dead in the eye and say, "I never said that," or "You are imagining things," or "You are being completely hysterical." And if they say it enough, over time, the victim stops defending their reality and starts asking, "Am I actually losing my mind?" Once you do not trust your own memory, you are completely under their control. And they reinforce that disorientation with triangulation, which basically means every relationship with a narcissist is secretly a threesome. Triangulation is the introduction of a third party into the dynamic to manufacture pathological jealousy and keep you off balance. It could be an ex. It could be a co-worker they claim is obsessed with them. It could be inventing a scenario where a barista was hitting on them. It is like an auction house bidding up a cheap painting. They create artificial scarcity. They want you to think this painting must be incredibly valuable because all these other people are bidding on it, which makes you fight harder to win something you do not even really want. It creates artificial competition. If you are exhausted trying to prove you are better than the ex or the co-worker, you are entirely focused on winning the narcissist's conditional love. You are so busy fighting the imaginary rival that you forget to analyze how terribly the narcissist is treating you. So the trap is dark, it's calculated, and it actively rewires your reality. The obvious question is, how do we spot these red flags early, before the love bombing takes hold and corrupts our internal hard drive? The first layer of defense is understanding what is called weaponized empathy. Most people assume narcissists lack empathy entirely, like a robot. But that is not true. They possess highly tuned cognitive empathy, meaning they understand it intellectually, but they do not feel it emotionally. They observe human emotional reactions like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. They know the exact script to use. If you tell them your mother was just diagnosed with an illness, they know how to arrange their face into a sympathetic expression and say the perfect comforting words to gain your trust and lower your defenses. But because it is a script and not genuine emotional resonance, it drops the moment it no longer serves them. If you bring up your sick mother a week later when they are stressed or do not need to impress you, They will be completely ice cold or even annoyed that you are taking the spotlight off them. The effective empathy, the actual feeling of another person's pain, is entirely absent. So you have to look for the cracks in that cognitive mask. There are some incredibly practical, everyday tests to spot them. First, the airport test. This revolves around how a person regulates their nervous system under unexpected, mundane stress, like a flight delay or a flat tire. A neurotypical person might be annoyed, but they regulate, they compromise. They say, let's grab a coffee, we'll figure out a hotel. But for the narcissist, an inconvenience is not just bad luck, it is a personal insult to their grandiosity. The mask slips entirely. They create absolute chaos. They blame you for not packing faster. They act wildly entitled with the gate agent. They demand special treatment. They fundamentally lack the emotional maturity to handle frustration without victimizing someone else. This entitlement bleeds right into another mundane area, the bad driver test. Statistically, narcissists are incredibly aggressive, dangerous drivers. They are the ones constantly tailgating, weaving through traffic and cutting people off. To them, the rules of the road simply do not apply to their journey. And perhaps the most revealing metric is the success test. How does this person react when you win? If you get a massive promotion, a healthy partner celebrates you naturally. In psychology, this is often called the Michelangelo phenomenon. A healthy partner sees the masterpiece in you, helps sculpt you into your best self, and genuinely wants you to shine. But a narcissist cannot tolerate you shining because it threatens their position as the center of the universe. They need to be the sun. If you come home with great news, watch their micro-expressions. They might offer a tight, fake smile, but quickly become depressed, irritable, or subtly minimize your achievement. Oh, a promotion. That is going to mean you are working late and abandoning me. Twisting it around, they immediately twist your victory into a narrative about their own victimhood. Which brings us all the way back to the warning from the beginning. Beware the overly charming, charismatic person who sweeps you off your feet. Charm is a verb. It is something a narcissist does to you to disarm you. But we need to balance this because obviously not everyone who is charming is pathologically dangerous. There are good charming people, the green flags. The true unicorns of the dating and networking world are people who are highly charismatic but fundamentally possess humility and agreeableness. They can hold a room's attention with a great story, but the moment they finish, they turn the spotlight outward. They ask you a genuine question about your life, and they actively listen to the answer. The charm is paired with a genuine curiosity about others, rather than a desperate need for applause. Okay, but let's get practical. What if you are listening to this and realizing the call is coming from inside the house? You are already stuck with one. Maybe it is a boss you rely on for your mortgage, a co-parent you have to communicate with for the next decade, or an elderly family member. You cannot just rip the Band-Aid off and enforce no contact. So how do you survive the day-to-day if you absolutely cannot remove yourself from their sphere of influence? Your only viable survival strategy is radical acceptance. That means letting go of the fantasy that you can fix them completely. We are deeply conditioned by society to believe that relationships just take hard work, and that if we find the right words or communicate our pain clearly enough, the other person will have an epiphany and change. But they will not. You cannot fix a narcissist. Trying to build a healthy, reciprocal relationship with them is like trying to bake a cake without flour, eggs, or sugar. It does not matter how hard you stir the bowl or how much love you pour into it. The fundamental ingredients for a healthy relationship simply do not exist in their psyche. Think of it like accepting that February in Chicago is freezing cold. You do not stand outside in a t-shirt screaming at the sky, trying to use logic to convince the blizzard to become a sunny day. You accept that it is freezing and you put on a heavy coat. You protect your own core temperature. And the best psychological coat you can wear in any interaction with them is a technique called DEEP. Let's break that down because this is a literal shield. It stands for don't defend, don't engage, don't explain, and don't personalize. So when they throw a wild baiting accusation at you, which they will because they want to trigger you, you give them absolutely nothing to work with. Narcissists are energized by chaos. They want the fight. They want you to passionately explain your side so they can twist your words, play the victim, and drain your energy. You essentially have to act like you are in the world's most boring legal deposition. You become a grey rock, uninteresting, unbothered, unresponsive to drama. Let's role-play this for a second. Say they come at you and say, "You are terrible at your job, you are incredibly selfish, and everyone in the family secretly hates you." Instead of defending your character, you just look at them and say, "Well, okay, yes, exactly that." Or they say, "You never support my dreams, you are ruining my life." And you just nod and go, "I hear your frustration." That is the technique working. It requires immense emotional discipline. Your instinct will scream at you to defend your honor because it hurts. But by using the deep technique, you starve them of the narcissistic supply they are trying to extract from you. Without the drama and the emotional reaction, they will eventually get bored and look elsewhere for their fix. We have covered some heavy ground today. We have explored the hollow, anxious core of the narcissistic personality, the devastating mechanics of their abuse cycles, the subtle red flags to spot them early, and the tactical discipline required to deflect them. But let's bring it back to you and your own internal locus of control, because ultimately, the greatest defense against a narcissist is not just memorizing their playbook. The ultimate defense is radically, unconditionally loving yourself. That might sound a bit like a bumper sticker, but the psychology behind it is profound. It is about examining and lifting your conditions of worth. Far too many of us walk around believing our value as a human being is conditional. We unconsciously believe we are lovable only if we are highly successful, or only if we maintain a certain physical appearance, or only if we are endlessly accommodating and useful to others. And narcissists sense that. They are predators who prey on those exact insecurities. They sink their hooks into your subconscious belief that you are not quite enough. But if you do the internal work to drop those conditions, if you truly, deeply believe that you are lovable simply because you exist as a breathing human being in this world, a narcissist's manipulation has absolutely no hook to catch you on. When you possess a solid core of self-worth, the very first time a narcissist tries to devalue you or cross a boundary, you do not stick around trying to prove your worth to them. You do not try to win their approval. You simply recognize their behavior as toxic and you walk away. Protect your peace at all costs. Keep your inner circle ruthlessly curated. You do not owe anyone access to your energy. Your energy is your most valuable currency. Spend it on people who reciprocate it. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to chew on. We talked earlier about how the architecture of social media acts like gasoline poured onto the fire of modern narcissism. If our world, filled with curated feeds, endless photo ops, and algorithm-driven metrics of human validation, is functioning as a global incubator for narcissistic traits, are we slowly forgetting how to just exist peacefully as a supporting character in someone else's beautifully ordinary story? Think about that next time you get a post.